We were playing the 1 o'clock jump, and they were all shouting and hollering, and had all left a lot of souvenirs with us, saying things like, maybe we won't be needing these anymore. And I suspect as they marched off, a lot of them didn't need them anymore. And that's pretty heart-wrenching. You had to keep in mind all the time that you were being cheerful and bright and not looking at what might be happening ahead.
This was what was happening ahead. Nearly 16,000 Americans were killed or wounded in the first 11 days of the Normandy invasion. Captain Alex Schulman was a surgeon in a hospital tent.
And I was working away when the sergeant came in and said, "Captain, you better come out here and take a look at this scene." So I looked out into the field, and I was horrified because here was a huge field just covered with wounded soldiers. It reminded me of a scene from Gone with the Wind. It looked just like a Civil War battlefield scene. We went back in, and I said to the sergeant, "Get me about 25 syringes and about 25 vials of morphine. We're going out for a little walk." I have felt since coming home that the American public really never understood the war. You can see all the pictures of buildings broken down. You can see pictures of refugees filling up the highways. But you can't really get an impression of the war until you've smelled it. And that you don't see on TV.
If we'd stop and stand there a minute to think where we were and what we were doing, it didn't really seem real at all. I'm glad I did it, and I think we all were.
Now, folks, especially for the 2nd Motor Transport Battalion and the men at APO 986, Georgia sings this beautiful song.
I'll be around no matter how you treat me now. I'll be around from now on. And when things go wrong, perhaps you'll see you're meant for me. Oh, I'll be around from now on.
Come back to the summer of 1944. Bring a smile. And if you bring a song, make it the French national anthem. The parade into Paris is about to begin.
In a moment, our world continues. Liberation Summer, 1944.
Welcome back to Liberation Summer, 1944. Hitler has his own plan to liberate Paris. He's ordered his general to burn the city to the ground. Paris, burning. Time has run out. The Allies must get there first.
When France fell in 1940 and the Germans occupied Paris, not even Hitler could bring himself to foul what was now his own nest. But as the war turned against him, he changed. Paris, he ordered, must not fall into the hands of the enemy except as a field of ruins. In the summer of '44, the city was mined, wired to explode, and the people were ready to explode. One of the leaders of the French resistance was Jacques Chaban-Delmas.
La situation à Paris était très difficile.
The situation in Paris was very difficult. The atmosphere was tense.
La résistance.
The resistance, which had become more and more organized during the past several months, was impatient to act. All those working with the resistance had only one word on their minds: uprising. We learned that General Leclerc had received the order to march on Paris, and then fighting resumed in the streets and was spreading. We lost nearly 1,000 resistance fighters.
Including civilians, nearly 5,000 French were killed or wounded in a week of vicious street fighting. General Leclerc, accompanied by some American correspondents, reached Paris on August 25th, surrounded by love.
As soon as we began to get to the city, the masses of people came out, and of course, you know, the French Second Army was French, but the other people recognized us as Americans and came over and said, "Vive l'Amérique," and "Vive la France," and sang the Marseillaise, and they were throwing flowers at us and kissing us.
Young, old, everybody just absolutely overwhelmed by the fact that they were looking at the end of the war for them. And they just despised the fact, the German occupation. And they just couldn't believe that they were looking at Americans.
One who did believe was 23-year-old Ira Bergeron.
When I saw the first American, I'll never forget, I mean, we really went berserk.
And of course, they come running out with the famous champagnes and wines, and if you were the type that would have a drink with every one of them, you'd have been underneath the Jeep within an hour.
The feeling of joy is the one that really, I've never seen soldiers kiss so much all over, you know?
It was really a very wild scene. And I remember Ernie Pyle had made the remark that any GI who didn't have these two girls on his arms was an exhibitionist.
Women were kissing everyone. I have not been kissed so many times since. They didn't care whether you were homely or handsome. The French women were kissing every American soldier that came into town.
Spectacle extraordinaire.
It was an extraordinary sight. The column advanced, and there was a terrific crowd. Then all of a sudden, there were gunshots. You cannot imagine the speed with which hundreds of people, even thousands, can disappear.
The battle for Paris was over, but some Germans were slow to admit the obvious. One German was not. At 3 p.m., General Leclerc received the surrender of General von Choltitz, German commander of Paris, the man who saved Paris by disobeying Hitler, the man who did not burn Paris. Later that day, General Charles de Gaulle, leader of the Free French in exile, arrived in the city to let the nation know who its leader was. This would be the first time de Gaulle met his own representative in the French underground, Chaban.
With extraordinary compassion, he took my hand to shake it and held it in his a long time. Then he simply said to me, "Well done, Chaban."
Meanwhile, much of Paris was watching the roundup of Germans. Now the tables were turned, but the French wanted more than prisoners. They wanted vengeance.
The French were very bitter, and they had these wine bottles, and they were beating these Germans over the head, and I saw Germans fall to the ground with their heads bashed in, and it was difficult to know how to feel. You know, you detested these people, these evil bastards. And yet, you did feel that they were then in our custody and they should have been protected. But it was a tough scene.
And what the French felt toward the Germans was nothing compared to what they felt toward French who collaborated or slept with Germans. The last American to broadcast from Free Paris was Larry LeSueur in 1940. Now he was determined to be the first American to broadcast from Free Paris in 1944. The underground helped.
We take you to Paris, Larry LeSueur reporting.
Paris is full of French tonight, and cheering Paris surrounds them.
I introduced myself on the air first and said, would anybody pick up this broadcast and relay it to CBS in New York?
Everyone looks well dressed and well fed. Tonight, all Paris is dancing in the streets. And with the Larry LeSueur returning...
And so the first broadcasts we did were the first ones out of Paris.